At a lavish family dinner, I clutched my heavy pregnant belly and gasped that I was about to give birth. My own mother looked at my blood-stained dress, rolled her eyes and sneered for me to call a cab because they were too busy entertaining guests. Writhing in absolute agony, I drove myself to the emergency room bleeding and terrified. A week later, that same woman banged on my penthouse door with a fake smile for the cameras demanding to hold her precious grandson. I looked her dead in the eye and calmly replied, "What, baby?" Before I tell you how I tore my toxic family's fake empire down to the studs, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off the very people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. My name is Sienna. I am 32 years old, and until that fateful night, I spent my entire life trying to earn a seat at a table where I was never welcome. Growing up in the affluent circles of Atlanta meant everything was about image status and the color of your skin. But let us skip the ancient history and get right to the night my illusion of family shattered forever. My swollen feet throbbed inside my heels as I balanced a heavy silver tray of crab cakes and caviar. I was exactly 9 months pregnant carrying my son Jace. Every step I took across the imported marble floors of my parents' Buckhead estate sent a dull, heavy ache shooting up my lower back. This was not just a regular family gathering. This was my parents, Desmond and Yolanda, hosting a massive, over-the-top anniversary party for my younger sister Tiara and her husband DeAndre. The house was packed with Atlanta's black elite. I am talking about members of the Jack and Jill Society, local politicians, mega-church pastors, and corporate executives in tailored suits and designer gowns. The air was thick with the smell of expensive perfume-roasted meats and the suffocating stench of fake wealth. Instead of allowing me to sit and rest like any normal, heavily pregnant woman, my mother had practically forced me into the role of unpaid catering staff. The actual caterers were busy in the kitchen, but Yolanda insisted that I needed to make myself useful if I was going to take up space in her home. She claimed it was a tradition of hospitality, but I knew the absolute truth. It was her vindictive way of keeping me out of the main photographs and reminding me of my place. I was the dark-skinned, quiet daughter who never quite fit into their perfectly curated light-skinned aesthetic. I was the stain on their perfect portrait. I carefully navigated through a group of women draped in diamonds, offering the tray with a polite, strained smile. Across the room, Tiara was holding court. She wore a skin-tight, sparkling gold dress that left nothing to the imagination, posing for photos with her phone held high. Tiara was a social media influencer, famous for showing off a luxurious lifestyle funded entirely by our parents and her husband's endless string of failed startups. DeAndre stood next to her wearing a flashy velvet blazer, sipping top-shelf bourbon and laughing too loudly at his own jokes. He looked like the picture of ultimate success, but I knew the bank was already calling about his repossessed cars. My own husband, Malik, was supposedly mingling with the executives networking for his consulting business. I scanned the room for him, hoping he might take the tray from my aching hands or pull out a chair for me, but he was nowhere to be found. I was completely on my own, just like I had always been. A sharp snap of fingers pulled my attention back to the present. My mother Yolanda was marching toward me with a scowl that could freeze boiling water. She was flanked by two of her wealthiest society friends, Mrs. Higgins and Mrs. Davenport. Yolanda wore a custom silk gown, her hair laid to perfection, every inch of her screaming superiority. "Sienna, what on earth are you doing waddling around like a distressed duck?" Yolanda hissed, her voice low enough so the guests would not hear the venom, but sharp enough to cut me to the bone. "You are making my guests uncomfortable. And look at your hair. Could you not have bothered to press it or get a weave for your sister's special night?" Natural hair simply does not fit the dress code for an event of this high caliber. I forced my breathing to stay even, shifting the heavy silver tray to my other hand. "Mom, I have been standing for 4 hours. My feet are swollen and my water could break any day now. I am doing the absolute best I can." Mrs. Higgins offered the look of thinly veiled pity. "Oh, Yolanda, let the poor girl rest. Pregnancy is so incredibly taxing. Besides, not everyone can maintain Tiara's glamorous standards." My mother scoffed, waving her manicured hand dismissively. "Please." Tiara bounced back from her lipo and tummy tuck in a week. Sienna just uses this pregnancy as an excuse to look unkempt. It is always something with her. She was always our little number cruncher hiding behind books because she did not have the face for the camera. We paid for prestigious prep schools, and she could not even get into medical school. Now she just pushes papers at some boring financial firm. Tiara, on the other hand, just hit 2 million followers today. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted copper. I had not failed to get into medical school. I had actively chosen to pursue a master's degree in finance because I loved numbers. I loved building sustainable wealth. And that boring financial firm she was mocking was actually a private equity group where I was the secret CEO and majority shareholder. I managed tens of millions of dollars. But I had kept my wealth completely hidden from my family, knowing exactly how greedy and entitled they were. I let them believe I was just a mid-level analyst scraping by paycheck to paycheck. "You are right, Mom," I said softly, my voice devoid of emotion. "I could never compete with Tiara's followers. If you will excuse me, I need to get some water." Before I could retreat to the kitchen, the music suddenly lowered, and my father Desmond stepped up to the grand staircase holding a microphone. He tapped it twice, drawing the undivided attention of the entire ballroom. Desmond was a man who loved the sound of his own voice, a real estate broker who projected the image of a massive tycoon while secretly drowning in predatory loans. "Family and friends," Desmond announced, his booming voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Tonight we celebrate not just love but legacy. 5 years of beautiful marriage for my brilliant daughter Tiara and my incredible son-in-law DeAndre. We all know DeAndre has an incredible mind for business. His new luxury car dealership is going to revolutionize Atlanta. And because family always takes care of family, Yolanda and I want to present you both with a little token of our deep belief in your empire." Yolanda proudly stepped up to the staircase holding an oversized novelty check. The crowd erupted into applause as DeAndre and Tiara feigned surprise, covering their mouths and hugging each other. Desmond turned the check around so the cameras could capture the amount. $50,000. My breath hitched in my throat. $50,000 handed over with a bright smile for a vanity project that was guaranteed to fail. I stood in the shadow of a massive floral arrangement, gripping the edge of a marble side table to keep from collapsing. When it was time for me to go to college, my parents had flat out refused to pay a single dime. They claimed that since I chose to attend a historically black college instead of the Ivy League institutions they bragged about, I had to figure it out myself. I had worked 3 grueling jobs, taken out crushing student loans, and starved in tiny dorm rooms to get my degrees. When Malik and I bought our first modest home, I asked my father for a small loan for the down payment. He had laughed directly in my face and told me to ask my boss for an advance. Yet here they were throwing $50,000 at a man who spent his days playing golf and his nights in VIP clubs. The sheer injustice of it all burned like battery acid in my chest. Before I could process my mounting anger, a violent, paralyzing cramp seized my abdomen. I gasped, suddenly dropping the heavy silver tray onto the marble floor. I desperately needed Malik. The silver tray slipped from my trembling fingers, hitting the imported marble floor with a deafening crash that echoed through the grand foyer. A few guests turned their heads, their judgment poorly concealed behind crystal champagne flutes and designer masks. I did not care about their whispers, or my mother Yolanda shooting daggers at me from across the room. A searing, blinding pain ripped through my lower abdomen, radiating down my thighs and stealing the breath right out of my lungs. My knees buckled slightly. I gripped the cool edge of the marble console table, squeezing my eyes shut until the contraction passed. It was happening right now. My baby was coming. The room spun in a chaotic blur of sequined dresses and flashing cameras. I had to get out of the main hall immediately. I forced my swollen, aching feet to move, shuffling away from the blinding lights and the suffocating music of Tiara and DeAndre's lavish anniversary celebration. I slipped past the catering staff and headed down the long, dimly lit corridor that led to the extravagant guest suites in the east wing of the estate. The heavy mahogany doors and thick Persian rugs muffled the pounding bass of the party behind me. With every agonizing step, another wave of pain washed over me. I pressed one hand against the wall, leaving faint sweat marks on the pristine wallpaper. I took deep, shuddering breaths, trying to remember the breathing exercises from the birthing classes, My husband Malik had skipped. He always had a convenient excuse: a late strategy meeting, a sudden client dinner, an urgent networking event. I had spent my entire pregnancy making excuses for his absence, convincing myself that he was just working hard to build our future together. My heart pounded wildly against my ribs. I just needed to find him. I needed his arm around my waist. I needed him to drive me to the hospital. I approached the master guest suite, the massive room, Yolanda strictly reserved for her most elite visitors. The heavy door was slightly ajar, a sliver of warm golden light spilling out onto the dark hallway carpet. I reached out to push the door open, my hand trembling violently from the sheer physical trauma of early labor. That is when I heard it. Muffled voices, a soft, breathless giggle that made the blood freeze in my veins. It was a sound I recognized instantly. It was the exact high-pitched artificial laugh my sister Tiara used when she was getting exactly what she wanted. I froze in place. The contraction tearing through my stomach suddenly felt secondary to the icy dread creeping up my spine. I crept closer, completely silent, my breath caught in my dry throat. The sounds were coming from the massive walk-in closet attached to the suite. I nudged the heavy bedroom door open just enough to slip inside the room. The thick plush carpet absorbed my footsteps completely. I moved toward the closet, praying to a god. I was rapidly losing faith in that my mind was simply playing cruel tricks on me. I prayed it was just Tiara gossiping with one of her shallow influencer friends about the party guests. I peered through the narrow opening of the closet door. The scene inside struck me with the force of a physical blow. The world tilted violently on its axis. The air left the room. My husband, the man who had promised to love and protect me, was pinning my sister against the custom wooden shelving. Tiara had her arms wrapped tightly around his neck, her gold sequined dress hiked up around her waist. Malik had his hands tangled in her hair, kissing her with a desperate, hungry passion I had not seen from him in years. They were utterly consumed by each other, completely oblivious to the fact that I was standing mere feet away, carrying the child he claimed to want so badly. My vision went black at the edges. A scream clawed at my throat, but I clamped my hand over my mouth, biting down hard on my own palm to keep quiet. The metallic taste of blood flooded my tongue. I could not look away. I was paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the betrayal playing out in front of me, my own sister, the golden child of the family. The woman who had absolutely everything handed to her on a silver platter by our parents. She was not satisfied with stealing my parents' affection, stealing my college fund to buy her luxury cars, and stealing every ounce of peace in my life. She had to take my husband too, and Malik, the man who had chased me relentlessly, who swore he did not care about my family's toxic dynamics or their colorist remarks, who promised we would build our own safe haven away from their judgment. He was aggressively pulling at her dress, murmuring praises into her ear that he used to whisper to me in the dark. A fresh, violent contraction seized my body. I doubled over silently, bracing my shoulder against the doorframe to keep from hitting the floor. The physical agony of my tearing muscles was completely eclipsed by the psychological slaughter happening in my mind. Then they stopped kissing. Tiara pushed him back slightly, a wicked, triumphant smirk playing on her glossy lips. She traced his jawline with her manicured fingernail. "You are playing a dangerous game tonight," Malik. Tiara purred, her voice dripping with malice. "If my miserable sister comes looking for you and finds us here, this whole plan goes up in smoke. We are supposed to be celebrating my anniversary with DeAndre out there. I am exhausted from pretending to care about your pathetic wife." Malik let out a low, arrogant chuckle. He pulled her flush against his chest, his eyes filled with a predatory greed that made my stomach churn violently. "Just give me one more week with your miserable sister," he said, his voice entirely devoid of the warmth he used with me. The words hit me like a barrage of bullets tearing through my chest. I finally got her to sign the proxy forms last night. She was so tired from the pregnancy, she barely even read the paperwork. The minute I wire that $2 million from her private equity fund into DeAndre's Shell account, we are taking that trip to Dubai. Tiara's eyes lit up with unadulterated greed. She wrapped her arms around his neck again, pressing herself against him. "Are you absolutely sure the access is fully granted?" DeAndre has debt collectors breathing down his neck for that failed car dealership. If we do not get that cash injection soon, the bank is going to repossess everything. My parents will be humiliated in front of all their society friends. I am not losing my luxury lifestyle because my husband is a useless idiot. Malik kissed her neck, laughing darkly. You do not have to worry about a single thing, baby. I have full authorization now. Let DeAndre deal with the dealership mess, and let Sienna cry over her empty bank accounts. She has been hiding all that wealth from your parents for years, acting like she is just some basic analyst at a boring firm. It is only fair we redistribute her hidden wealth to the people who actually know how to live. She is so desperate for love she will probably blame herself when the money vanishes. I stood in the shadows, my lungs burning my heart, shattering into a million jagged pieces. The pieces of the puzzle clicked together with terrifying, undeniable clarity. This was never a marriage. This was a long con. A meticulously planned financial heist, orchestrated by the man sleeping in my bed and the sister who shared my blood. Malik never loved me. He had somehow discovered the truth about my private equity firm. He had dug into my hidden assets, the empire I had built entirely in the shadows, to protect myself from my family's insatiable greed. He had seen the millions I managed and decided to extract it, and he had partnered with Tiara to do it. Tiara laughed, a harsh, grating sound that vibrated through the quiet room. God, I cannot wait. She is always acting so superior with her quiet little life and her boring aesthetic. When she realizes her loving husband drained her secret accounts to fund my husband's business, she is going to lose her mind completely. I just hope you can stomach sleeping next to her for 7 more days. She looks absolutely massive right now. I do not know how you even touch her without gagging. Malik scoffed, a sound of pure disgust that cut deeper than any knife. I close my eyes and think about the payout, he replied casually. The baby is coming soon anyway. Once she is distracted with the kid, making the transfer will be child's play. By the time she notices the funds are missing, the money will be washed through 3 different offshore companies, and I will be drinking champagne with you in the Emirates. We just have to keep playing our parts tonight. Go back out there and kiss DeAndre for the cameras. I will go find her and hold her hand for a while. The cruelty was absolute. It was not just a physical affair, it was the total calculated annihilation of my life. They were discussing the theft of my life's work and the abandonment of my unborn child, as if they were planning a weekend getaway. The pain of the betrayal hit harder than the violent contractions tearing through my abdomen. A sharp, stabbing cramp forced me to bite down on my arm so hard I broke the skin. I tasted blood, hot and metallic, grounding me in the horrifying reality of the moment. I was entirely alone. My family did not just hate me. They were actively plotting to destroy me. My husband was a predator waiting to strike the final blow. If I burst into that closet right now, I would be the hysterical, crazy pregnant woman. They would deny it entirely. Malik would realize I knew about the proxy forms, and he would panic, potentially accelerating the theft before I could block his access. Tiara would play the victim, and my parents would immediately take her side, claiming my pregnancy hormones were making me delusional. I could not confront them right now. I had to protect my son. I had to protect the empire I bled to build from the ground up. I slowly backed away from the closet door, my hands trembling so violently I could barely control my movements. Warm fluid gushed down my legs, soaking into my dress and staining the expensive Persian rug beneath my feet. I did not care. I turned around and began the agonizing walk back down the long hallway. My vision tunneled. Every breath was a jagged knife in my chest. The physical pain of labor was blinding, but the emotional decimation was a cold, absolute zero. The Sienna who had walked down this hallway looking for her loving husband was dead. She died the second she heard him call her a payout. The woman walking back toward the ballroom was a predator waking up to the hunt. I wiped the cold sweat from my forehead and pushed my shoulders back. I had to survive this night. I had to get to a hospital, deliver my son safely, and systematically dismantle every single aspect of their miserable, parasitic lives. I reached the end of the hallway, the loud, obnoxious music of the anniversary party hitting me like a wall of sound. I stepped back into the blinding light of the ballroom, leaving a trail of blood and amniotic fluid on the marble floor. I was going to look the devil in the eye, and then I was going to burn their entire world to ashes. The blinding light of the massive chandelier in the ballroom hit my eyes like a physical strike. The hired string quartet was playing a lively, upbeat classical arrangement, a sharp contrast to the ragged, desperate sounds of my own breathing. I dragged my heavy, swollen feet across the pristine white marble, each agonizing step leaving a stark, glistening trail of crimson blood and clear amniotic fluid in my wake. My hand remained clamped over my violently cramping stomach as another massive contraction ripped through my core, twisting my muscles into tight knots of pure fire. I stumbled forward, unable to support my own weight any longer, and collided heavily with a tall mirrored cocktail table. A towering arrangement of expensive white orchids crashed to the floor, the heavy crystal vase shattering into 100 jagged pieces. The deafening sound brought the entire anniversary celebration to a screeching, immediate halt. The music died instantly. Hundreds of judging eyes snapped in my direction. Wealthy socialites in custom designer gowns and bespoke suits gasped aloud, physically stepping back as if my pain was a contagious disease. The lively, sophisticated conversations died on their lips, replaced by a suffocating, horrified silence. I stood there in the dead center of the room, my maternity dress clinging to my thighs, soaking wet and undeniably stained with the evidence of a severe medical emergency. The sharp metallic scent of blood cut through the heavy, suffocating fragrance of expensive perfumes that filled the air. I locked my eyes directly onto my mother. Yolanda was standing near the base of the grand staircase, a flute of vintage champagne resting lightly in her manicured hand, previously engaged in deep conversation with the mayor of Atlanta and his impeccably dressed wife. I forced my burning lungs to draw in air, fighting through the blinding haze of physical agony. "I need an ambulance," I gasped, my voice cracking and echoing in the dead silent room. "I am in labor. Something is very wrong. There is too much blood. Please, somebody call 911 right now." I expected sudden panic. I expected the immediate, chaotic rush of a family terrified for their daughter and their unborn grandson. I expected my mother to drop her crystal glass and rush to my side, screaming for help and demanding the best medical attention money could buy. I expected the basic human decency of a mother wanting to protect her suffering child. Instead, the reaction I received was a masterclass in absolute chilling cruelty. Yolanda did not gasp. She did not drop her glass. She did not run to catch me as I swayed dangerously on my feet. Her perfectly sculpted face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She looked down at the blood staining her imported marble floors, then back up at my sweat-drenched face. Her eyes were devoid of any maternal warmth, reflecting only the harsh, cold calculation of a woman whose perfect social event had just been interrupted by an inconvenient nuisance. She set her champagne flute down on a passing waiter's tray with a sharp, aggressive clink. She marched toward me, her heels clicking loudly in the quiet room. She did not reach out to touch me. She stopped a full 3 feet away, ensuring her custom silk gown remained safely out of reach from my bleeding body. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Yolanda hissed, her voice, kept at a low, venomous whisper, yet perfectly audible in the stunned silence of the ballroom. "You are making an absolute spectacle of yourself. Look at this disgusting mess you are creating on my floors. You are ruining your sister's special night with your desperate need for attention." "Mom, I am bleeding," I pleaded, gripping my stomach as another massive wave of pain threatened to pull me to the floor. "The baby is coming right now. I need a hospital immediately." Yolanda rolled her eyes, an exaggerated motion of profound annoyance and complete disregard for my suffering. She reached into her designer clutch, digging around for a moment before her fingers closed around something. She pulled out a crumpled $50 bill. With a flick of her wrist, she literally tossed the money directly at my feet. The green paper fluttered to the floor, landing right in a puddle of my own amniotic fluid. "Call a cab," Sienna, Yolanda commanded, her tone flat and entirely devoid of any basic human empathy. "We have the mayor's wife here, along with half the city council and several prominent real estate developers." I am not having blaring sirens and flashing red lights pulling up to my driveway and ruining the elegant aesthetic of Tiara's anniversary party. You are always so incredibly dramatic. Just walk out the back service door so you do not track any more of your mess through the main foyer and order a taxi for yourself. I stared down at the crumpled $50 bill soaking in my blood. The sheer absurdity of the moment paralyzed me. My mother was prioritizing a social gathering and the visual aesthetic of her driveway over the life of her daughter and her unborn grandchild. I slowly lifted my head, my vision swimming with intense pain, and searched the room for a single face that held any shred of compassion. I looked toward the private bar, hoping to find my father. Desmond was standing there, leaning casually against the mahogany counter. He held a glass of expensive bourbon in his right hand. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. Instead of rushing to help his bleeding daughter, Desmond simply turned his head, deliberately looking away, and took a slow, measured sip of his drink. He wanted absolutely no part of this embarrassment. He was completely checked out, choosing his liquor and his cowardly avoidance over my life. Before I could process my father's blatant abandonment, a figure pushed through the crowd of stunned guests. It was Malik. My husband rushed toward me, his face arranged into a mask of exaggerated theatrical concern. "Oh my God," Sienna, Malik exclaimed loud enough for the society guests to hear his performance. He stopped right next to my mother, hovering near the edge of the puddle on the floor. He held his hands up, hovering them in the air as if he wanted to help, but he made absolutely zero physical effort to support my weight or guide me toward a chair. He did not put his arm around my waist. He did not pull out his phone to call for help. He just stood there playing the role of the shocked, worried husband for the audience, while ensuring he did not get his tailored suit dirty. I knew exactly why he was stalling. I had just heard his entire sinister plan in that closet. He needed me out of the way, but he needed to maintain his image. He needed to look like the helpless victim of a tragic medical circumstance so he could later steal my funds without raising suspicion. Right behind him, Tiara emerged from the hallway. Her gold-sequined dress was slightly wrinkled from her illicit session in the closet, a detail only I would notice. She glided up to Malik's side, crossing her arms over her chest. Tiara did not even bother to fake concern. She glared at me with pure, unadulterated disgust. Her eyes raked over my disheveled hair, my sweat-drenched face, and my stained clothes. She let out a loud, theatrical sigh, shaking her head, as if I had intentionally chosen to go into premature labor just to steal her spotlight. The resentment radiating from her was palpable. I stood completely surrounded by my family. My mother, who had thrown money at me like a beggar. My father, who refused to even look at me. My husband, who was faking panic while secretly plotting to steal my entire life's work. And my sister, who was sleeping with that same husband and currently glaring at me as if I was a piece of trash left on her pristine floor. They were all complicit. They were all entirely comfortable watching me suffer if it meant their perfect evening remained intact. In that exact agonizing moment, something inside me completely snapped. I did not cry. Not a single tear fell from my eyes. The last lingering shred of my familial love, the desperate, pathetic hope that they would eventually care about me, died instantly. It withered and turned to ash right there on the marble floor. I felt a cold, terrifying clarity wash over my mind, freezing out the panic and replacing it with pure, focused adrenaline. The woman who wanted their love was gone. I slowly bent down, fighting through a massive contraction, and picked up the soaking wet $50 bill. I straightened my spine, refusing to cower. I looked Yolanda dead in the eyes, reached out and dropped the bloody crumpled bill directly into her glass of vintage champagne. The liquid fizzed and spilled over the rim, splashing onto her custom silk gown. Yolanda gasped in absolute horror, stumbling backward as if burned. I did not say a single word. I turned my back on all of them. I reached into my pocket, my fingers closing tightly around my car keys. I dragged my bleeding, broken body toward the heavy oak front doors, ignoring the shocked gasps of the Atlanta elite, parting like the Red Sea to let me through. Every step was pure physical torture, a searing reminder of their betrayal, but I did not stop. I pushed through the doors and into the humid night air, marching alone toward my car to drive myself to the emergency room, leaving their toxic world behind forever. I knew right then with absolute certainty that they would all pay very dearly for what they had done to me tonight. The cool air hit my face, a sharp contrast to the suffocating heat of my parents' mansion. I gripped the leather steering wheel of my SUV, my knuckles turning white as another contraction tore through my abdomen. The leather seat beneath me was already ruined, soaked in blood and amniotic fluid, but material possessions were the furthest thing from my mind. I slammed the car into drive, pressing heavily onto the gas pedal. The tires screeched against the pristine cobblestone driveway, tearing up Yolanda's perfectly manicured flower beds as I swerved wildly toward the main gate. I did not look back at the glowing windows of the estate. The people inside were dead to me. Every erratic beat of my heart was fueled by a terrifying rage. It was a primal, all-consuming fury that drowned out the blinding physical agony radiating from my spine. I was driving half-conscious, my vision blurring at the edges, the streetlights smearing into long, frantic streaks of yellow and white across the dark Atlanta sky. The city streets morphed into a treacherous obstacle course packed with oblivious night drivers. I blew through a red light, the blaring horn of an oncoming truck barely registering over the roaring in my ears. I bit down on my lower lip, tasting fresh copper, forcing the pain to anchor me to consciousness. My hands were slick with sweat as I wrestled the heavy vehicle around a sharp corner. The dashboard, GPS, glowed indifferently, showing 4 miles left to the Atlanta General Medical Center. 4 miles felt like 400. I gripped my stomach with my right hand, feeling the frantic kicks of my unborn son. He was struggling against the trauma his own father had orchestrated. "Hang on, Jace," I gasped aloud to the empty car. "Mommy is going to get you out of here." I swerved around a slow-moving sedan, my tires clipping the curb. The pain was no longer coming in waves. It was a constant searing fire burning through my pelvis. I dug my fingernails into my thigh, using the sharp sting to snap my brain back to reality. I refused to die in this car. My rage was a physical entity now propelling me forward when my body was shutting down. I navigated the final stretch of highway, the illuminated red emergency sign finally piercing the darkness. I did not have the strength to find a parking spot. I barreled straight up the curved ambulance ramp, ignoring the massive flashing signs warning vehicles to stay back. I slammed my foot on the brake pedal with the last ounce of strength left. The SUV jerked violently, the front bumper crashing heavily into the concrete barrier of the emergency drop-off zone with a sickening crunch of metal. The sudden impact threw me forward against the steering wheel, knocking the remaining wind from my lungs. I threw the car into park and shoved the door open. I tumbled out onto the harsh concrete pavement, my knees buckling instantly. I collapsed against the vehicle, dragging myself toward the glowing automatic doors. Blood poured down my legs, leaving a horrific, smeared trail across the pristine entrance. "Help me!" I screamed, my voice cracking into a desperate feral sob. The automatic doors slid open, and the triage receptionists looked up. Their faces drained of color instantly. For a second, the entire emergency room stood completely frozen in sheer terror. Then absolute chaos erupted. A team of trauma nurses and orderlies burst through the swinging double doors, sprinting toward me with a gurney. They caught me just as my legs gave out, completely hauling my dead weight onto the padded mattress. "We have a massive hemorrhage," a nurse yelled, pressing her hands firmly against my stomach. "Get an operating room prepped right now. Where is the father? Who drove you here?" I grabbed the collar of her scrubs, my fingers leaving bloody prints on the blue fabric. "I drove myself." I gasped, choking on a sob. "Please save my baby." The nurse stared at me in absolute horrified disbelief. The medical staff exchanged panicked, sickened glances, unable to comprehend how a woman in a critical hemorrhage situation had managed to navigate city traffic alone. They strapped an oxygen mask over my face and began running alongside the gurney, pushing me frantically down the sterile corridors. As we crashed through the surgical wing doors, an admissions administrator jogged alongside the moving gurney, hurriedly digging into my blood-soaked designer purse to find my identification. She pulled out my driver's license and quickly scanned the name into her handheld tablet. A massive flashing red alert filled her screen. Her eyes widened to the size of saucers. She stopped dead in her tracks, shouting down the hallway to the attending physician. "Doctor, you need to look at this." The attending physician snapped his head around, irritated by the delay. "What is it?" he demanded, preparing his surgical gloves. The administrator shoved the tablet toward him, her voice trembling. "This is Sienna Johnson. She is the patient." The doctor looked at the screen and physically stumbled backward. The entire medical team seemed to freeze for a fraction of a second. "Page the chief of staff." Immediately the doctor yelled, his voice echoing with absolute urgency. "Wake him up and get him down here right now." The nurses looked bewildered, but the doctor did not have time to explain. Sienna Johnson was not just a random emergency patient bleeding out in their trauma ward. The hospital had recently opened a state-of-the-art maternity and neonatal intensive care wing. It was funded by a massive anonymous private equity donation. The executive hospital board knew the true identity of their savior. My firm was that anonymous benefactor. I had orchestrated the largest charitable donation in the history of Atlanta General Medical Center. Now, the woman who had built the very walls they were standing inside was dying on their gurney because her family forced her to drive herself to the hospital. The hospital staff understood the immense gravity of the situation. Within minutes, the chief of staff burst into the operating room, fully scrubbed and barking rapid-fire orders. The atmosphere shifted from chaotic panic to military precision. I was fading fast. The bright surgical lights above me merged into a blinding halo. The anesthesiologist spoke soothing words into my ear, but they sounded like they were coming from underwater. "We are losing her blood pressure," someone shouted. "Fetal heart rate is dropping dangerously low. We have to make the incision now." I felt the cold splash of iodine on my stomach, followed by a terrifying pressure. I could feel the frantic, aggressive tugging as the surgical team fought a brutal battle to extract my child. My heart monitor shrieked a high-pitched, frantic warning. I was slipping away. The cold darkness finally rushed in, swallowing me whole. I surrendered to the void, my final conscious thought, a plea for my son to survive. The darkness felt heavy, an infinite and endless ocean of absolute silence. Slowly, the faint rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor pierced through the heavy veil of anesthesia. I pried my eyes open, my eyelids feeling weighed down by lead. The blinding surgical lights were gone. Instead, I found myself in a sprawling, softly lit suite that looked more like a five-star hotel penthouse than a hospital room. Thick velvet curtains framed large windows overlooking the Atlanta skyline. This was the exclusive VIP recovery suite, reserved only for the hospital's most elite donors. I tried to sit up, but a sharp, burning agony ripped across my lower abdomen, forcing a sharp hiss through my teeth. I was heavily bandaged, battered and bruised, but I was breathing. I was alive. My panicked eyes darted around the luxurious room, searching frantically. Then I saw it. Next to my bed, an incubator hummed quietly. Inside, connected to tiny wires and monitors, was my son. Jace was incredibly small, born premature due to the severe trauma. His tiny chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. He was fragile, covered in medical tape, but he was fighting. I was kicking his tiny legs, a warrior who had survived a battlefield before taking his first breath. Tears finally spilled down my cheeks. I reached my hand through the small porthole, and his tiny fingers wrapped tightly around my index finger. The grip was surprisingly strong. He was alive and I was alive. We had survived the ultimate betrayal. I stared at my innocent son, making an unbreakable vow to the universe. I was going to crush the people who put us in this room. Malik, Tierra, Yolanda, and Desmond had tried to bury me alive in the freezing dark. They were going to find out very soon that they had planted a tiny bitter seed, and I would eventually grow into an unstoppable, merciless monster that would completely consume their entire fake world forever. The promise I made to my son echoed in the quiet hum of the VIP recovery suite. I tore my gaze away from Jace and hit the call button clamped to my bed rail. Within seconds, a private nurse rushed into the room, her face tight with concern. I did not ask for pain medication. I did not ask for water. I demanded my encrypted laptop. The nurse hesitated, glancing at the monitors displaying my fluctuating vital signs. I stared right through her, my voice turning into a weapon. I told her I was the primary benefactor of this entire wing, and if she did not contact my head of security to retrieve my laptop immediately, I would personally see to it that her career ended today. She scrambled out of the room, her rubber soles squeaking against the polished floor. I leaned back against the stark white pillows, my breathing ragged. My body was broken, stitched together with surgical thread and sheer willpower, but my mind was an absolute fortress. 20 minutes later, a towering man in a sharp black suit entered the room. It was Marcus, my personal director of security. He had been on my payroll for years, operating completely outside the knowledge of Malik and my parasitic family. He handed me the sleek black laptop, his face giving away no emotion, though his eyes lingered on my bandaged abdomen. I nodded once, dismissing him. He stepped outside to guard the door. I placed the cold metal machine on my lap, ignoring the fierce burn of my fresh incision. I typed in my complex alphanumeric password, followed by a retinal scan and a biometric thumbprint. I had built this digital empire from the ground up, shielding every asset behind layers of corporate encryption. I ignored the throbbing shooting through my spine. Every ounce of my focus narrowed onto the glowing digital interface before me. The screen flared to life, casting a harsh, blue glow across my exhausted face. The very second my private equity dashboard loaded, a massive red warning banner flashed across the screen. Critical security alert. Unauthorized access attempt. My blood ran cold, then immediately boiled over. Malik was making his move. The timing was absolutely sickening. He had calculated this perfectly. He assumed I was either unconscious, heavily sedated, or dead. I thought I was bleeding out in a random city hospital, distracted by the premature birth of our son. The screen displayed the pending transaction details. A wire transfer request for exactly $2 million was sitting in the queue, waiting for the final automated clearinghouse approval. The destination was a newly formed shell account registered in the Cayman Islands, but the routing structure had DeAndre's greasy fingerprints all over it. Malik had used the forged proxy authorization forms he had tricked me into signing last week. He had slipped them into a stack of routine tax documents while I was exhausted from a brutal third trimester migraine. I watched the progress bar inching forward, the system verifying the forged digital signatures. I was literally draining my liquidity while I was fighting for my life. The sheer audacity of his greed was staggering. He was planning to steal the foundation of my son's future to fund Tierra's luxury shopping habits and DeAndre's pathetic business ventures. I could picture Malik right now, probably sitting in a quiet corner of my parents' Buckhead estate, sipping expensive scotch, tapping his phone and waiting for the confirmation email that would make him a millionaire. He thought he had outsmarted the quiet, ugly duckling sister. He thought he had won. He severely underestimated the monster he had just awakened. He was about to learn a brutal lesson in true, unfiltered financial warfare. I cracked my knuckles, the sharp sting of my IV line barely registering. I did not just cancel the pending wire transfer. I initiated a total catastrophic financial lockdown. With 5 rapid keystrokes, I executed an emergency protocol I had designed for hostile corporate takeovers. The $2 million transfer was instantly rejected, slapped with a permanent fraud block. But I was not stopping there. I moved to our joint personal accounts, the ones Malik used to pay for his tailored suits and expensive car leases. I drained every single penny, transferring the funds into an untraceable offshore holding trust. I effectively wiped out his entire financial existence in less than 60 seconds. He was cut off from every single dollar we supposedly shared. I left him with an available balance of exactly $0.00. Next, I accessed the proxy management portal. I permanently revoked the forged authorization, flagging his IP address for criminal financial tampering. I watched the system lock him out completely. Any attempt he made to log back in would now generate an automatic report sent directly to the federal authorities. I wanted him to feel the exact moment the digital door slammed shut in his face. I wanted him to experience the sudden, terrifying realization that his golden goose had just turned into a dragon. The financial guillotine had dropped, severing his access to my wealth forever. He was now completely broke, entirely dependent on the very family he was conspiring with. I took a deep, satisfying breath, the sterile hospital air filling my lungs. The defense was secure. Now it was time for the absolute offense. To understand my next move, you have to understand the grand illusion of my family. Desmond and Yolanda parroted around Atlanta high society, like royalty, throwing lavish parties, wearing designer labels, and judging anyone who did not meet their ridiculous colorist standards. But their entire empire was built on a crumbling foundation of lies, debt, and desperation. Desmond was a real estate broker who had not closed a legitimate profitable deal in over 4 years. To maintain their Buckhead mansion and Yolanda's expensive country club memberships, he had resorted to taking out massive predatory loans from shadow lenders. He was mortgaged to the hilt, drowning in high-interest debt that he could never hope to repay. His creditors were already circling, waiting for the final default. And DeAndre Tierra's flashy, arrogant husband was even worse. He played the role of a successful entrepreneur, but his luxury car dealership was a massive financial black hole. He owed millions to private investors and supply chain vendors. He had been borrowing money from shady lenders just to cover his payroll and keep the lights on. That was the real reason Tierra and Malik were conspiring to steal my $2 million. They needed a massive cash injection to save DeAndre from bankruptcy and to keep my parents' fake wealthy aesthetic from collapsing in front of their elite friends. They were all parasites feeding off each other's delusions, desperately trying to maintain a facade of generational wealth while standing on the edge of total financial ruin. They mocked me for being a quiet number cruncher, completely oblivious to the fact that I held the power to shatter their precious glass houses. They thought they were the predators, but they had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with. I opened a secure portal to my primary shell company, Obsidian Holdings. It was a corporate entity completely detached from my name, a ghost corporation I used to quietly acquire distressed assets. I pulled up the financial dossiers on both Desmond and DeAndre. The data was pathetic. Their lenders were desperate to offload the high-risk debts for pennies on the dollar. I did not hesitate. I initiated a series of aggressive immediate buyouts. Using Obsidian Holdings, I purchased the primary and secondary mortgages on my parents' sprawling Buckhead estate. The transaction cleared in minutes. I transferred the deeds and the promissory notes directly into my corporate portfolio. I literally owned the roof over their heads. Next, I targeted DeAndre's failing dealership. I bought up his commercial property leases, his inventory financing debts, and his outstanding business loans. I swept up every single financial obligation he had in the city of Atlanta. The digital contracts finalized, cementing my absolute control. I closed the laptop, the screen going black, reflecting my exhausted but victorious face. The power dynamic had completely shifted in the span of 30 minutes. Desmond and Yolanda thought I was just a disappointment they could toss $50 at. Tierra thought I was a pathetic stepping stone to her luxury lifestyle. Malik thought I was an easy mark. They had no idea that they had just handed me the keys to their destruction. I was no longer just the unwanted dark-skinned daughter. I was legally their biggest creditor. I owned their home. I owned their businesses. I owned their entire fake, pathetic reality. I leaned back against the hospital pillows, turning my gaze back to my son in his incubator. The battle lines were drawn, and I held every single weapon. They were going to lose everything. And they would lose absolutely everyone. The heavy oak door to my recovery suite swung open with a quiet, authoritative click. It was not a nurse or a doctor this time. It was Evelyn Vance. Evelyn was my lead corporate attorney, a razor-sharp, fiercely intelligent woman who commanded fear and respect in every boardroom across Atlanta. She was a shark in a tailored Chanel suit, and she had been on my retainer for 5 years. I had summoned her the moment I finished dismantling my family's financial foundation. She walked into the room carrying a sleek leather briefcase, her expression entirely devoid of sympathy or pity. That was exactly why I hired her. I did not need a shoulder to cry on. I needed a tactical executioner. Evelyn pulled up a chair next to my bed and immediately opened her briefcase, laying out a stack of crisp legal documents on my tray table. She did not ask how I was feeling. She simply looked at my son in his incubator and then looked at me, nodding once in silent acknowledgement of the war we were about to wage. We have a very narrow window to establish absolute legal dominance, Evelyn stated, handing me a heavy gold fountain pen. Her voice was crisp and clinical. Malik's financial manipulation attempt gives us tremendous leverage, but we must act before he realizes he is locked out of the accounts. The first order of business is the child. She slid a pristine hospital form toward me. It was Jace's official birth certificate. I stared down at the blank spaces waiting to be filled. The section demanding the father's name felt like a glaring offensive trap. Under normal circumstances, Georgia law automatically assumes the husband is the legal father. But these were not normal circumstances, and I was not a normal victim. Evelyn anticipated my hesitation and tapped her manicured fingernail against the paper. Do not write his name, she instructed coldly. We are utilizing a specific legal loophole regarding profound abandonment, severe endangerment, and active financial fraud. Because he forced you to drive yourself while hemorrhaging, and because we have the digital timestamp of him attempting to drain your assets while you were in surgery, we are filing a motion of immediate paternal unfitness and criminal endangerment. Leave the father section completely blank. I gripped the gold pen, my hand remarkably steady. I carefully wrote Jace's name, giving him my maiden name, erasing any trace of Malik's existence from his identity. I drew a thick, heavy black line straight through the section designated for the father. It was an incredibly powerful defining moment. With one stroke of a pen, I legally severed Malik from my son's life. He would not get to play the role of the proud, doting father for his friends. He would have no legal standing, no visitation rights, and no access. He was nothing to us now. Evelyn smoothly pulled the birth certificate away and slipped it into a secure folder. She immediately replaced it with a much thicker, more aggressive stack of legal paperwork. This brings us to the next phase of his eradication, she said smoothly. Evelyn laid out an emergency ex parte protective order. This was not a standard run-of-the-mill restraining order. This was a devastating, heavily documented legal weapon designed to absolutely paralyze Malik. It detailed his deliberate refusal to provide medical assistance during a life-threatening emergency. It outlined his coordinated, premeditated attempt to commit massive wire fraud against my estate. It explicitly stated that he posed a severe, immediate physical and psychological threat to both me and my newborn child. Because of my substantial influence and Evelyn's aggressive maneuvering, we were bypassing the standard bureaucratic delays. I have a superior court judge reviewing this packet right now, Evelyn explained, sorting the pages with lethal efficiency. She owes my firm a considerable favor. By sunrise, this protective order will be fully active and legally binding. If Malik attempts to come within 500 feet of you, your properties, or this child, he will be instantly arrested and jailed without bail. If he tries to contact you via phone, email, or third party, it is a criminal violation. I signed my name on every dotted line, my signature sharp and uncompromising. I was building an impenetrable fortress around my son and my empire. Malik thought he was clever by conspiring with my sister Tiara in the shadows of a closet, but he lacked the vision and the ruthlessness to understand real power. He was a petty thief playing in a billionaire's arena. Evelyn gathered the signed affidavits and returned them to her briefcase. The legal barricade is complete, she confirmed, snapping the gold locks shut. Malik is legally boxed out of your life, your assets, and your child's future. The police will serve him with the restraining order and the divorce petition simultaneously. He will be stripped of everything in a single devastating moment. I leaned back against the hospital pillows, processing the immense relief washing over me. The legal eradication was flawless, but staying in this hospital room was a massive liability. My family was ignorant, but they were also desperate and unpredictable. Once Yolanda realized I was missing, or once DeAndre panicked over his sudden financial collapse, they would start hunting for me. They would leverage their high society connections to find my location, intending to drag me back into their toxic drama. I could not allow them anywhere near my son. I needed to vanish completely, slipping through their fingers like smoke. I turned to my security director, Marcus, who had been standing silently by the door. It is time to initiate the silent exit, I commanded. Marcus nodded sharply, pressing his earpiece. Within 10 minutes, the atmosphere in the recovery suite shifted into high gear. Marcus had coordinated a premier private armed security detail. These were not standard mall rent-a-cops. They were elite ex-military private contractors men who specialized in high-threat extractions and asset protection. 4 massive, heavily armed guards filed into the room, their presence immediately commanding absolute authority and securing the perimeter. The hospital's chief medical officer arrived personally to oversee our departure. Due to my overwhelming financial contributions to the medical center, rules that applied to normal patients simply ceased to exist for me. The neonatal specialists had carefully evaluated Jace. Although he was born premature, he was breathing independently, and his vitals were remarkably strong. They cleared him for specialized transport, transferring his tiny fragile body into a state-of-the-art mobile incubator pod. The pod was a marvel of modern medicine equipped with internal oxygen monitors, thermal regulation, and a shock-absorbing frame. It was completely secure and ready for movement. I was still weak, my surgical incision burning with every movement, but adrenaline masked the pain. The nurses helped me into a discreet, comfortable wheelchair, draping a heavy blanket over my lap. Marcus flanked my right side, while Evelyn walked briskly on my left. 2 armed guards took point in front of us, and 2 more secured the rear, pushing Jace's glowing incubator pod with meticulous care. We did not use the main hospital corridors. We did not pass through the bustling lobby where prying eyes or lingering reporters might catch a glimpse of our departure. Marcus led us down a restricted subterranean maintenance elevator. The metal doors slid shut, separating us from the sterile hospital environment and plunging us into the quiet concrete depths of the building. We emerged into a highly secure, private underground loading dock. A fleet of 3 sleek black armored SUVs sat waiting with their engines purring quietly in the cool night air. The tinted windows hid everything inside. The guards moved with practiced silent efficiency. They secured Jace's incubator pod into the heavily modified medical transport vehicle in the center of the convoy. Marcus gently assisted me into the back seat of the lead SUV, securing my seatbelt and closing the heavy armored door. The sound of the lock engaging was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of absolute safety. I looked out the tinted window as the garage doors slowly rolled open, revealing the dark, quiet streets of the city. I was leaving behind a lifetime of emotional abuse, blatant colorism, and profound neglect. I was leaving behind a family that viewed me as nothing more than a disposable stepping stone, and a husband who viewed me as a financial payout. I did not tell a single soul where I was going. I left no forwarding address, no notes, and no clues. The convoy pulled out of the loading dock, slipping seamlessly into the empty lanes of the highway. I watched the glittering skyline of it shrink in the rear-view mirror. I vanished into the dark, protective embrace of the night, becoming a complete ghost to the people who sought to destroy me. They would wake up tomorrow morning to a world where I no longer existed. The armored convoy navigated the winding highways, slipping through the quiet hours of early morning until we reached the heart of downtown Atlanta. We pulled into the subterranean garage of a gleaming glass skyscraper. This was not a rental. It was a sprawling multi-million-dollar penthouse, occupying the entire top floor, purchased entirely in cash under the name of my shell corporation, Obsidian Holdings. No public records tied me to this address. No paper trail led back to Sienna Johnson. I had designed this space to be an impenetrable fortress, long before I ever went into labor, anticipating a day when my hidden wealth would need a physical sanctuary. Marcus and his security team escorted the medical incubator onto the private biometric elevator. The steel doors closed, shooting us upwards until we reached the summit. Stepping out of the elevator, my breath caught in my throat. The penthouse was a masterpiece of modern architecture, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic, unobstructed view of the entire Atlanta skyline. The city lights glittered far below us, looking small and insignificant. Standing there, looking down at the sprawling metropolis, a profound realization washed over me. I was finally untouchable. The medical team immediately set up a sterile, state-of-the-art nursery for Jace in the master wing. They connected his monitors to a private power grid, ensuring his fragile life was guarded by the best technology money could buy. I sat in a plush velvet chair beside his crib, watching his tiny chest rise and fall. The heavy, oppressive weight of my family's expectations, their colorist remarks, and their endless financial demands had evaporated. I was completely insulated from their toxicity. As the sun began to rise over the city, painting the sky in brilliant streaks of orange and purple, my phone chimed softly. It was a secure, encrypted message from my attorney, Evelyn. The financial traps I had set the night before were officially springing shut. It was time to watch the rats scramble. Through Evelyn's meticulous updates and the tracking software I had quietly installed on Malik's devices months ago, I was able to watch his magnificent downfall unfold in real time. While I was securing my son's future in my sky-high fortress, my treacherous husband was waking up with a very different agenda. According to the digital footprint, Malik and my sister Tiara had left the anniversary party and headed straight to an exclusive high-end boutique in Phipps Plaza the very next morning. They were arrogant, completely drunk on the illusion of stolen wealth. Malik had promised Tiara a custom diamond tennis bracelet to celebrate their supposed victory over my private equity funds. I could vividly picture the scene. Malik standing at the pristine glass counter, grinning that fake charming smile he used to manipulate me, sliding his sleek platinum credit card across the register. He expected a seamless transaction. He expected to walk out of that store a millionaire hand in hand with his wealthy wife's sister. Instead, the boutique manager swiped the card, paused, and swiped it again. The machine flashed a harsh, glaring decline code. Malik, utterly embarrassed in front of his mistress, likely laughed it off as a simple bank error. He pulled out a second card, a joint account I had already completely drained. Declined. He tried a third card. Declined. Every single piece of plastic in his expensive leather wallet was absolutely worthless. The manager, losing patience with the humiliated fraud, standing in her store, politely asked him to provide another form of payment or leave the premises. Tiara must have been furious, her greedy anticipation instantly turning into bitter resentment as they walked out empty-handed. Panicking, Malik sped across town toward our marital home in the upscale suburbs. He assumed there was simply a glitch in the banking matrix. He thought he could just walk into his comfortable house, sit in his home office, and call the wealth management hotline to resolve the issue. He pulled his luxury sedan into the driveway, completely oblivious to the trap waiting for him. He marched up the front steps and shoved his key into the deadbolt. It did not turn. He yanked the handle, rattling the heavy wooden door, but the locks had been entirely replaced hours ago. Before he could even begin to pound his fists against the wood, the front door swung open. It was not me standing there. It was two massive, unsmiling men from Marcus's private security firm. They stepped out onto the porch towering over Malik. He demanded to know who they were and ordered them out of his house. The guards did not waste time arguing. One of them smoothly reached into his jacket and handed Malik a thick, heavy manila envelope. It contained the emergency protective order, the divorce filings, and a formal notice of criminal investigation for wire fraud. The guard explicitly informed Malik that he was legally barred from entering the property, contacting his wife, or coming within 500 feet of his child. Malik tried to argue, his voice cracking with sudden, overwhelming panic, but the guard simply grabbed him by the shoulders of his tailored suit, physically lifting him off the porch. They dragged him down the steps and forcefully threw him onto the manicured front lawn. They warned him that if he stepped 1 foot back onto the property, they would have him arrested for violating a court order. The front door slammed shut, locking him out of the life he had tried to steal. Malik was officially a desperate, cornered animal. He had no money, no home, and a looming criminal investigation hanging over his head. He knew he could not admit the truth to my family. He could not walk into my parents' Buckhead estate and confess that his grand scheme to steal my $2 million had failed spectacularly, leaving him completely destitute. I needed to spin a narrative that would paint him as a victim and buy him enough time to figure out a counterattack. Through Evelyn's surveillance network, I learned exactly how he played his next move. Malik rushed straight to my parents' mansion, bursting through the front doors with a fabricated performance worthy of an Academy Award. He threw himself onto the expensive living room sofa, burying his face in his hands, acting like a completely shattered, heartbroken husband. Yolanda and Desmond hurried into the room demanding to know what was wrong. Malik looked up, forcing fake tears into his eyes. He told them a monstrous, elaborate lie. He claimed that the trauma of the emergency delivery had completely broken my mind. He spun a sickening tale, insisting that I had suffered a sudden severe postpartum mental breakdown in the hospital. According to his twisted narrative, I had become entirely delusional, kidnapped our newborn son, and vanished into thin air, leaving behind only aggressive lawyers and a trail of frozen bank accounts. I expected my mother to gasp in horror. He expected her to weep for my safety, to call the police and organize a massive search party for her missing daughter and fragile premature grandson. But Yolanda did not shed a single tear for my well-being. Her reaction perfectly encapsulated the shallow image-obsessed rot at our family's core. Upon hearing that I had supposedly lost my mind, Yolanda did not ask if I was medically stable or if the child was receiving neonatal care. Instead, her face twisted into pure, unadulterated outrage. She slammed her hand down on the coffee table, her voice reaching a shrill, hysterical pitch. She paced across the room, cursing my name, furious about how my sudden disappearance would sabotage her social calendar. Yolanda had spent months bragging to the Atlanta Black elite circle about her upcoming role as a glamorous grandmother. She had already booked a wildly expensive photo shoot with Atlanta Black Elite magazine to showcase our perfect family, specifically aimed at repairing Desmond's deteriorating image and securing wealthy clients for his failing business. "She needs that baby for the magazine cover next Tuesday," Yolanda screamed at Desmond, completely ignoring Malik's fake tears. "I have already paid a massive non-refundable deposit for custom outfits. If we do not deliver those photos, the church committee will talk for months. We will become an absolute laughingstock." Desmond nodded frantically, his own panic rising over the lucrative business contacts he would lose. Neither cared that I was allegedly suffering from severe psychosis. They only cared that their vital public relations tool was missing. Tiara joined the frenzy, her eyes wide with panicked realization. Without my money, DeAndre's dealership was doomed. Without the baby, their social armor would shatter. They instantly mobilized into a ruthless hunting pack. They did not want to save me. They wanted to drag my son back into their toxic spotlight. Sitting in my impenetrable penthouse, I smiled. Let them hunt. They would never see the absolute hell I prepared for them. The frantic scramble to locate me took them exactly 4 days. Malik, entirely cut off from my financial grid, had been forced to confess to Desmond and Yolanda that he had absolutely no funds to hire a private investigator. Desperate for her upcoming magazine photo shoot, my mother pawned a diamond bracelet. She used that cash to hire a shady, bottom-barrel private detective who operated out of a strip mall in Decatur. This investigator lacked legal ethics, but possessed enough digital scraping software to flag a massive quiet medical transport arranged under a ghost LLC. He tracked the transport route directly to the underground parking garage of the most exclusive residential skyscraper in downtown Atlanta. When the investigator handed over the address, my family was utterly bewildered. They sat in my parents' foreclosed, crumbling Buckhead mansion, staring at the glossy photographs of the glass tower. They still genuinely believed I was just a mid-level financial analyst scraping by on a modest salary. Desmond scoffed, telling the others I must be squatting in an empty unit or renting a broom closet on a lower floor. Tiara rolled her eyes, insisting I had probably maxed out several predatory credit cards just to hide in a building I had no business entering. They crammed into DeAndre's leased SUV, a vehicle he was hiding from repo men, and sped toward the city center. Through the encrypted security feeds linked directly to my laptop, I watched their vehicle pull up to the perimeter of my building. I sipped a warm cup of herbal tea, my healing abdomen supported by a plush silk cushion, and observed them like rats navigating a maze. They stepped out onto the pristine sidewalk, craning their necks to look up at the towering glass monolith that pierced the clouds. The sheer opulence of the property clearly unsettled them. This was billionaire territory. This was a building where professional athletes and tech moguls resided. The idea that their dark-skinned, supposedly unremarkable scapegoat could afford to breathe the air in this zip code short-circuited their deeply ingrained colorist and elitist complexes. Malik looked particularly anxious, tugging at the collar of his wrinkled suit. He knew something was terribly wrong. He knew the $2 million he had tried to steal had vanished, but his arrogant mind still refused to comprehend the true scale of my power. Getting past the ground floor security of my building was no easy feat. The lobby was guarded by highly trained professionals who did not tolerate uninvited guests. My family huddled near the revolving glass doors, arguing in hushed, panicked whispers about how to bypass the front desk. Fate unfortunately handed them a fleeting stroke of luck. A wealthy elderly resident, weighed down by an armful of designer shopping bags, slowly approached the secure entrance. Desmond, ever the opportunistic real estate hustler, immediately sprang into action. He jogged forward, flashing his signature fake charismatic smile, and graciously offered to hold the heavy glass door open for the woman. She thanked him, completely oblivious to the swarm of toxic parasites slipping into the building right behind her. They bypassed the main concierge desk by trailing close behind the resident, ducking into the private residential elevator bank before security could intercept them. I watched the entire pathetic infiltration on my high-definition monitor. They piled into the mirrored elevator car. Tierra immediately checked her reflection, smoothing down her tight dress and adjusting her hair, completely unconcerned that she was about to confront the sister whose husband she had been sleeping with. DeAndre stood rigidly, sweating profusely, his mind likely racing with thoughts of his impending bankruptcy. Malik stared at the glowing floor indicator, his jaw clenched in nervous anticipation. Yolanda simply checked her expensive watch, mentally calculating how much time she had to drag my baby out of the building and into the waiting arms of her hired photographer. When they realized the elevator required a biometric scan to access the penthouse level, panic briefly set in. However, my building manager, acting on explicit premeditated instructions I had given him that morning, remotely unlocked the top floor access. I wanted them to come up. I wanted them standing right at my threshold. I needed them exactly where I could completely destroy them. The elevator shot upwards, carrying them directly into the jaws of the trap. The silver doors slid open with a soft chime, depositing them into the private marble-lined foyer that exclusively serviced my penthouse. They stepped out cautiously, their expensive leather shoes sinking into the thick custom-woven carpet. The sheer scale of the private landing, adorned with curated modern art and sleek recessed lighting, left them momentarily speechless. They crept toward the massive double oak doors of my residence. Malik raised his fist and began banging aggressively against the heavy wood. Sienna, "Open the door right now," he shouted, dropping the concerned husband act and adopting a harsh, demanding tone. "We know you are in there. Open this door before we get building management to drill the locks." The pounding echoed through the quiet foyer, loud and obnoxious. Desmond chimed in, his voice booming with fake authority. "Sienna, this is your father. Stop this ridiculous tantrum and open up immediately. You are making a massive mistake and embarrassing this family." I remained perfectly still behind the heavy oak doors, watching their every move through the high-definition security camera. My armed security detail stood silently behind me, waiting for my signal. I held up one finger, instructing them to hold. The hallway performance was peaking, and I wanted to savor their delusional confidence. Yolanda pushed Malik and Desmond aside. She pulled her smartphone out and smoothed her hair. She was preparing to broadcast a completely fabricated narrative to the world. Yolanda initiated an Instagram live stream, instantly alerting her thousands of elite Atlanta society followers. The second the red live button illuminated the screen, Yolanda's entire demeanor shifted drastically. She forced fake tears, her lower lip trembling with practiced theatrical distress. She held the phone up, ensuring the opulent background of my private foyer was visible to her wealthy audience. "Please, everyone, I need your prayers right now." Yolanda cried into the camera, her voice cracking with fake anguish. "My heart is completely broken. As many of you know, my poor sweet daughter Sienna gave birth recently. But she has suffered a severe, terrifying postpartum mental breakdown. She is not in her right mind. She kidnapped my precious, fragile newborn grandson from the hospital and vanished into the city. We have been frantic, searching everywhere, unable to sleep or eat. We finally tracked her down to this building. We are standing outside her door right now trying to save her from herself. We are here to rescue my precious grandson before she does something unthinkable. Tiara squeezed into the camera frame, wiping away non-existent tears, playing the role of the devastated, supportive sister. We just want our family back together. Tiara whimpered, leaning her head on her mother's shoulder. Sienna, if you are listening to this through the door, please just hand over the baby. Malik loves you. We all love you. Let us get you the psychiatric help you so desperately need. The sheer audacity of their performance was sickening. They were weaponizing my deeply traumatic emergency birth to paint themselves as heroic saviors. They were setting the stage to legally brand me an unfit, unstable mother, paving the way for Malik to easily demand full custody, and by extension, full control of whatever meager assets they still believed I possessed. They expected the heavy oak doors to slowly creak open. They fully expected to find a weak, weeping, emotionally shattered woman standing in the doorway, clutching a baby and begging for their forgiveness. They anticipated a broken, hysterical victim, whom they could easily physically overpower, verbally manipulate, and drag back into their toxic web of control. They thought they were about to walk into a messy, unkempt apartment and command the room. Yolanda kept the camera rolling, angling it toward the door, waiting to capture my supposed mental collapse live on the internet for all her friends to see. She nodded at Malik, signaling him to pound on the door one more time. Open the door, Sienna. Malik yelled, his voice laced with aggressive entitlement. You have nowhere left to hide. They had willingly walked into the spotlight, bringing an audience of thousands to witness exactly what was about to happen. They wanted a show. They wanted a dramatic climax to boost their social standing and cover up their impending financial ruin. I took a slow, deep breath, smoothing down the front of my pristine emerald green silk robe. I handed my teacup to Marcus, my head of security. It was time to give my family exactly the kind of show they deserved. I reached out and firmly grasped the heavy brass door handle, ready to obliterate their entire reality. I twisted the heavy brass door handle and pulled the massive oak doors inward. The sudden shift in air pressure caused my family to stumble forward slightly, their aggressive posturing immediately collapsing into confused, defensive stances. The scene that greeted them was the absolute antithesis of the pathetic, unhinged breakdown they had so eagerly anticipated. I stood tall and utterly composed in the center of the grand entryway. I was not crying. I was not disheveled. I was draped in a floor-length custom emerald green silk robe that flowed around my body, completely concealing any physical remnants of my emergency surgery. I reached over, taking my delicate porcelain teacup back from Marcus, taking a slow, deliberate sip. Behind me stood Marcus and three other heavily armed ex-military security contractors. They were dressed in immaculate black suits, their hands resting neutrally but menacingly near their holstered weapons. The sheer intimidation factor of my private detail hit my family like a physical shockwave. Desmond dropped his jaw, his eyes darting frantically between my serene face, the armed guards and the sprawling multi-million-dollar penthouse visible behind me. Tiara took a physical step backward, bumping into DeAndre, her confident smirk vanishing instantly. Malik stood frozen, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with a sudden dawning terror. He finally realized that the woman standing before him was not the naive, compliant wife he had so casually betrayed in a guest room closet. He noticed the expensive artwork, the polished marble, and the absolute power radiating from my posture. Yolanda, however, was too deeply consumed by her own narcissistic performance to properly read the room. She was live streaming, and she desperately needed her dramatic climax. She shoved her smartphone directly into my face, the bright recording light glaring in my eyes. She forced her features into a mask of exaggerated, agonizing sorrow, crying crocodile tears for her captivated online audience. Sienna Yolanda wailed, her voice hitting that grating theatrical pitch she reserved for church fundraisers and high society galas. Oh, my sweet, sick daughter. We have been so terribly worried about you. You are clearly not in your right mind. Where is my precious grandson? Bring Malik's baby out here right now so we can take him home and get you the psychiatric help you desperately need. Please, Sienna, give us the baby before you do something you will regret forever. She reached her free hand out, making a grabbing motion toward me, expecting me to crumble and fetch the child. Malik quickly stepped up beside her, adopting his own fake expression of wounded fatherhood. Please, Sienna, Malik pleaded, staring directly into the lens of Yolanda's phone to ensure his performance was broadcast to the world. I just want my son. We want to help you. Come back home with us where you belong. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I took another slow, methodic sip of my herbal tea, letting the silence stretch out until the tension in the hallway became completely unbearable. I lowered the teacup, my gaze turning into absolute ice. I looked directly past the glaring camera lens, piercing straight through Yolanda's fake tears and locked onto her eyes. I let the silence hang, ensuring every single person watching her ridiculous live stream was paying close attention. What baby? I asked. My voice was flat, devoid of any emotion, echoing coldly against the marble walls of the private landing. Yolanda stopped crying instantly. Her phone dipped slightly, the camera angle dropping to the floor as her brain struggled to process my response. She blinked rapidly, her face twisting from fake sorrow into genuine ugly confusion. What are you talking about? She snapped, abandoning her sweet, concerned mother persona completely. Are you completely insane? You were 9 months pregnant. You gave birth last week. Bring the baby out here right now. Stop playing these stupid games. Malik stepped closer, trying to project a menacing authority he simply did not possess. Sienna, stop this nonsense, he demanded, his voice dropping an octave. Hand over my son immediately. I am not going to ask you again. I handed my teacup back to Marcus, never breaking eye contact with the parasitic group trespassing on my doorstep. I took a thick, heavy manila folder from the sleek console table beside me. There is no baby registered to you, Malik. I stated clearly, my voice ringing with absolute undeniable authority. Malik recoiled as if he had been physically struck. What the hell does that mean? He shouted, his fake composure shattering entirely. It means exactly what I said, I replied, taking a deliberate step forward. When I filled out the official birth certificate at the hospital, I utilized my legal right to leave the father section completely blank. Under the law, due to your documented medical abandonment and severe criminal endangerment, you possess absolutely zero parental rights. You are not a father. You are a biological donor who has been legally erased from my child's existence. Yolanda shrieked, a high-pitched, genuine sound of absolute horror. You cannot do that. That is my grandson, my legacy. I have a magazine cover shoot scheduled for Tuesday. I need that baby for the photographs. You are ruining everything. There is no grandson for your magazine covers, Yolanda. I fired back, my voice turning into a lethal weapon. You lost any right to claim my son the moment you chose a society party over my life. You looked at your bleeding, suffering daughter, threw a $50 bill at my feet, and told me to call a cab. You relinquished your rights to my life and the life of my child that very night. You do not get to use my trauma as a prop for your social climbing. Desmond sputtered, trying to intervene. Now see here, Sienna, you are taking this entirely too far. You cannot just erase Malik from the child's life. He is your husband. I can, and I did, I stated, tossing the heavy manila folder directly into Malik's chest. He fumbled to catch it, his hands shaking violently as the thick stack of legal documents spilled out onto the plush carpet of the foyer. Pick them up, Malik, I commanded. Read exactly how your miserable life ends today. Malik dropped to his knees, his eyes frantically scanning the bold, aggressive legal headers. He pulled out the first document, his face draining of all remaining color. It was the Emergency Ex Parte Protective Order. That is a restraining order, I explained, looking down at his form. You are legally barred from coming within 500 feet of me, my properties, or my son. You are currently standing on my property. You are in violation of a court order right now. Tiara gasped, grabbing DeAndre's arm. This is crazy, Tiara yelled. You cannot just issue a restraining order because you are mad. You are overreacting. Oh, it gets much worse, Tiara, I promised, flashing a venomous smile. Turn to the next page, Malik. Show them exactly how far I am overreacting. Malik's hands shook uncontrollably as he flipped the page. He stared at the formal divorce petition, which explicitly cited extreme cruelty, abandonment, and financial fraud. But it was the third document that finally broke him. He stared at the notice of criminal investigation, the official federal seal glaring back at him. That is a formal notice of investigation for attempted wire fraud, I clarified. I have the digital timestamp of your attempt to drain $2 million from my private equity accounts while I was undergoing surgery. The federal authorities are already monitoring your communications. Malik looked up at me, his eyes wide with a frantic, suffocating terror. He opened his mouth to speak, to deny the charges, to beg for mercy, but no sound came out. He knew he was trapped. He knew his brilliant closet conspiracy had been completely intercepted and weaponized against him. He was staring down the barrel of a federal prison sentence. Yolanda dropped her phone, the Instagram live stream still running, broadcasting her humiliation. She reached out, trying to grab the doorframe. Sienna, please, you cannot do this to us. The resulting scandal will absolutely ruin your father's business. We will be ruined in this city. You are destroying our reputation. I stared at her, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, sterile satisfaction. You are already ruined, Yolanda. You built an empire on lies, and I am the demolition crew. I looked at the armed guards standing behind me. Marcus, I said, keeping my eyes locked on my family's horrified faces. These individuals are trespassing on private property and actively violating a court-mandated protective order. Please remove them from my floor immediately. If they resist, have them arrested. The four massive security contractors stepped forward, their presence forming a wall of muscle and authority. They moved into the hallway, forcing my family back toward the elevator doors. Malik scrambled backward on his hands and knees, clutching the legal documents to his chest. Desmond tried to argue, but a guard placed a heavy hand on his shoulder, silencing him. Tierra dragged DeAndre into the elevator car. Yolanda stood frozen, gaping. Just get in the elevator right now, Yolanda, I ordered smoothly. And next time you want to play the loving grandmother for your audience, I suggest you call a cab. I firmly grabbed the heavy brass door handle and slammed the massive oak doors shut, the deafening sound echoing loudly through the penthouse like a gunshot, completely sealing them outside my world forever. The heavy oak doors were inches from clicking shut when a violent, desperate force crashed against the solid wood. Malik threw his entire body weight against the panels, wedging his expensive leather shoe into the narrow gap. The sudden impact sent a jarring shudder through the brass handle I was holding. I was not going to leave quietly. He was a cornered rat facing federal prison, and his fragile ego could not handle being dismissed so coldly. He shoved the door back open with a guttural roar, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged rage. "You crazy witch!" Malik screamed, saliva flying from his lips as he lunged toward me. His hands were outstretched like claws, aiming for my throat. He intended to hurt me, to physically force me into submission, just as he tried to financially break me. He did not even make it 2 steps into my private foyer. Marcus and the closest security contractor moved with terrifying synchronized speed. Before Malik could register the counterattack, Marcus grabbed his outstretched arm, twisted it sharply behind his back, and slammed him face first into the textured marble wall. The sickening thud of Malik's skull connecting with the solid stone echoed down the pristine corridor. The second guard kicked his legs apart, pinning him entirely immobile against the wall with a combat boot pressed firmly into his lower spine. Malik gasped in sudden pain, his cheek squished flat against the cold marble, completely neutralized in under 2 seconds. "Get your hands off him!" Yolanda shrieked from the hallway, dropping her phone. She took a hesitant step forward, but a third armed guard immediately stepped into the doorway, blocking her path. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I calmly walked over to the console table and picked up my silver iPad. I had anticipated a physical outburst. I knew these parasites would not simply walk away without a fight. I swiped the screen, unlocking the device, and turned the volume up to maximum capacity. "You came here demanding explanations and screaming about family loyalty," I said, my voice cutting through Malik's pathetic groans. "You'll want to know exactly why my husband is currently being restrained, and why you are all being permanently erased from my life. Watch the screen very closely." I held the iPad up high so Yolanda, Desmond, Tierra, and DeAndre had a clear, unobstructed view. I tapped the play button. The crystal-clear, high-definition audio and video filled the quiet hallway. It was the security footage I had pulled from the hidden camera in the master guest suite closet on the night of the anniversary party. The screen illuminated with the undeniable image of Malik pinning Tierra against the custom wooden shelving. The audio was pristine, capturing every single disgusting, incriminating word they had spoken. The digital version of Tiara's voice echoed through my foyer. If my miserable sister comes looking for you and finds us here, this whole plan goes up in smoke. We are supposed to be celebrating my anniversary with DeAndre out there. I am exhausted from pretending to care about your pathetic wife. Then came Malik's arrogant, venomous reply. Just give me one more week with your miserable sister. I finally got her to sign the proxy forms last night. The minute I wire that $2 million from her private equity fund into DeAndre's Shell account, we are taking that trip to Dubai. The reaction in the hallway was instantaneous and absolutely explosive. The color drained completely from DeAndre's face. He stared at the glowing iPad screen, his mouth hanging open in sheer paralyzed shock. He watched his beautiful influencer wife enthusiastically kissing another man while actively plotting to steal millions of dollars to cover up his own business failures. The public humiliation was absolute. Turn it off, Tiara shrieked, lunging forward in a desperate, pathetic attempt to grab the iPad from my hands. Marcus simply extended his massive arm, pushing her back into the hallway without breaking a sweat. It is a fake, Tiara screamed, looking frantically at her husband. DeAndre, I swear to God it is a deep fake. She manufactured that video to ruin us. DeAndre was not listening to her lies. His shock instantly morphed into a volcanic, explosive fury. The polished, flashy entrepreneur facade completely melted away, revealing the desperate, humiliated man underneath. He spun around and grabbed Tiara by the shoulders of her expensive designer jacket, shaking her violently. You are sleeping with this broke, pathetic loser. DeAndre roared, his voice cracking with rage. You let him touch you while we were hosting our own anniversary party downstairs. You were going to use stolen money to fund my dealership and then run off to Dubai with him. You lying, treacherous snake. Tiara burst into genuine tears, terrified of her husband's explosive wrath. DeAndre, please, it was just a stupid mistake. He manipulated me. He told me it was the only way to save your dealership from bankruptcy. I was trying to help you. DeAndre shoved her away with such force that she stumbled backward, crashing into Yolanda. Do not you dare put this on me, DeAndre screamed, pointing a trembling finger in her face. You embarrassed me in front of half of Atlanta. You slept with your sister's husband. You are absolute trash. I am divorcing you today. I am taking everything. I let out a sharp, cold laugh that completely silenced the chaotic hallway. I handed the iPad to the guard next to me and folded my hands neatly in front of my silk robe. I do not need any of you, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet pitch. I own you, DeAndre scoffed, though his eyes darted around nervously. You do not own anything. You are just a bitter, jealous woman who got lucky with a couple of investments. Give me my $2 million so I can save my dealership and get away from this insane family. I turned my gaze directly onto DeAndre, pinning him like a bug under a microscope. DeAndre, I said smoothly, your luxury car dealership was permanently foreclosed on at exactly 8 o'clock this morning. The commercial property leases were terminated, and your inventory financing debts were called in full. You are currently entirely bankrupt. Your business no longer exists. DeAndre froze, the blood rushing to his face. What are you talking about? He stammered. The bank gave me a 30-day extension on those loans. The original lender gave you an extension, I corrected him. But those debts were sold on the secondary market yesterday afternoon. I shifted my focus to my father, who was suddenly looking incredibly pale. And Dad, I continued, my voice dripping with lethal precision. The bank is seizing your sprawling Buckhead mansion this coming Friday. The primary and secondary mortgages went into hard default. The eviction notices are already being drafted by the Fulton County Sheriff's Office. You have exactly 4 days to pack your things before you are thrown out onto the street. Desmond gasped, clutching his chest. You cannot possibly know that. My brokers assured me the refinancing was processing. Your brokers lied to you because they were terrified of your shadow lenders, I stated coldly. The hallway was dead silent save for the muffled, pained groans of Malik still pinned against my foyer wall. The reality of their financial destruction was slowly dawning on them, but they still could not connect the final devastating dot. Who bought the debts? Desmond whispered, his voice trembling with sheer terror. Who called the loans? I smiled ruthlessly, savoring the absolute horror blooming in their eyes. Obsidian Holdings bought the debts. I answered, relishing every single syllable. Obsidian Holdings bought your mortgages, Desmond. Obsidian Holdings bought your commercial leases, DeAndre. They stared at me completely uncomprehending. I am the sole proprietor and chief executive officer of Obsidian Holdings, I revealed, delivering the final, crushing blow. I bought your debts. I own your commercial properties. I legally own the mansion you sleep in. I am the bank. I am the creditor holding the execution order on your entire fake empire. Yolanda staggered backward. Her perfect high society mask shattered right before my eyes. She had tossed a crumpled $50 bill at me while I was bleeding out on her floor. Now, the harsh truth was burning her alive. Her luxury cars, expensive country club memberships, and entire social standing were funded by predatory debt that I personally controlled. She absolutely did not own a single thing. Malik sobbed against the cold marble, finally comprehending that his treacherous gamble had cost him his freedom and financial future. The realization hit them like a freight train. The daughter they had treated like absolute trash, the woman they had mocked, abandoned, and tried to steal from, was now the undisputed owner of their entire lives. They were completely at my mercy, and I had absolutely none to give. I gave a single dismissive nod to Marcus. He and the security team immediately sprang back into action, shoving my stunned, humiliated family toward the elevator. Desmond stumbled, his face ashen, while Yolanda wailed, her designer heels dragging across the custom-woven carpet. Tierra was hyperventilating, desperately clutching DeAndre, who violently shoved her off, refusing to even look at her. Malik, still groaning from the severe impact against the marble wall, was hauled up by his collar and tossed into the elevator car like a heavy bag of garbage. The silver doors slid shut on their horrified, defeated faces, sealing them out of my fortress and casting them down into the harsh reality of their complete financial ruin. The swift descent down to the lobby must have been the longest, most suffocating ride of their entire lives. Thrown out onto the cold Atlanta streets without an ounce of dignity, they went into immediate frantic survival mode. They had lost their luxurious homes, their failing businesses, and their secret cash cow in a matter of hours. The only weapon they had left in their arsenal was their meticulously crafted social image. Within 24 hours, Yolanda and Tierra launched a massive, highly coordinated smear campaign designed to completely obliterate my reputation within the Atlanta Black elite circles. Yolanda tapped into her extensive network of influential church committees, prestigious charity boards, and the elite Jack and Jill Society. She hosted emergency teas and urgent, dramatic prayer circles in the living room of the mansion she did not even realize she no longer owned. She wove a spectacular, horrifying narrative of my supposed mental collapse, crying genuine-looking tears as she lied to her wealthy peers. Tierra took the campaign digital, weaponizing her 2 million Instagram followers with terrifying efficiency. She posted multiple tearful, heavily filtered videos wearing no makeup to appear appropriately devastated. In these videos, she claimed her beloved older sister had suffered a severe, violent psychotic break during the trauma of childbirth. According to their entirely fabricated story, I was experiencing extremely dangerous postpartum psychosis that rendered me completely detached from reality. They boldly told everyone that I had illegally hacked into my father's business accounts, draining his hard-earned retirement funds in a fit of paranoid delusion. They blatantly claimed I had kidnapped my own premature baby from the neonatal intensive care unit and was holding him hostage in an undisclosed location, stubbornly refusing him vital medical care. The sheer scale and audacity of their lies was breathtaking. They expertly painted me as a deeply unstable, vindictive monster who desperately needed to be institutionalized, successfully pivoting the public narrative away from their own impending bankruptcies. They needed the entire city to believe that any sudden financial ruin falling upon Desmond and DeAndre was entirely the result of my sudden psychotic theft, rather than their own profound business incompetence, gross negligence, and insatiable greed. They flooded the internet with fake concern, turning my trauma into a viral spectacle. Malik, absolutely desperate to avoid the looming federal wire fraud charges, decided to eagerly join the media circus. He partnered with a notorious high-drama Atlanta podcast hosted by a shady, loudmouthed men's rights advocate known for attacking successful women. The highly anticipated episode premiered with massive online fanfare. I watched the broadcast on my high-definition monitor, resting comfortably in my plush velvet armchair while my security team stood guard outside. Malik sat in the dimly lit studio wearing a plain gray sweater to look humble and relatable, playing the role of the exhausted, heartbroken father to absolute perfection. He stared directly into the camera, with fake glistening tears claiming he was a fiercely devoted, loving husband who had been cruelly alienated from his fragile newborn son by a deeply troubled, malicious woman. He completely omitted the glaring fact that he was caught on hidden camera, sleeping with my younger sister and actively plotting to steal my private equity funds. Instead, he spun a wild tale telling the aggressive host that I had locked him out of our marital home without warning, drained his personal bank accounts out of pure, unadulterated spite, and filed a baseless, vindictive restraining order, simply to keep him away from the child he so desperately wanted to hold and protect. He begged the live audience for legal defense funds, claiming he was an innocent victim of a heavily biased family court system that automatically favored wealthy, abusive mothers over hardworking, dedicated fathers. The comments section exploded with instant outrage. Angry strangers demanded my immediate arrest. Society bloggers debated my mental health status on Twitter. My family was successfully whipping the entire city into an absolute toxic frenzy, generating a massive wave of public sympathy they foolishly hoped would shield them from the severe legal consequences of their actual crimes. Fueled by the overwhelming internet support and the aggressive backing of Yolanda's wealthy society friends, Malik took his final fatal step into the trap. He hired a sleazy, high-profile divorce attorney known for taking predatory media-driven cases and staging dramatic press conferences on the courthouse steps. The very next morning, an aggressive and highly publicized lawsuit was formally filed against me in the Fulton County Family Court. Malik's attorney stood before a dozen local news cameras declaring his client was fighting to save a child from a deranged mother. The legal demands embedded in the lawsuit were absolutely staggering. Malik sued for a flat 50% of my entire private equity portfolio, citing that my vast wealth was built during the timeline of our marriage and was therefore automatically a shared marital asset under state law. He aggressively demanded full, immediate physical and legal custody of Jace, arguing that my fabricated postpartum psychosis made me a critical life-threatening danger to a fragile, premature infant. Finally, he requested an astounding $50,000 a month in emergency spousal support, claiming I had maliciously stripped him of his livelihood, ruined his professional consulting reputation, and left him completely destitute on the streets of Atlanta. I sat in my quiet, sunlit penthouse, looking out over the sprawling, beautiful Atlanta skyline through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my warm chamomile tea, feeling the soothing liquid calm my healing throat. I was not angry. I was not panicked by the trending hashtags, the fake outrage, or the vicious defamatory articles circulating on local gossip blogs. I was experiencing a profound, absolute sense of unshakable tranquility. My toxic family genuinely believed they were burying me under an insurmountable mountain of public outrage and aggressive legal threats. They truly thought their aggressive, highly visible public relations strategy would inevitably force me to surrender my assets just to avoid the crushing, public humiliation of a high-profile society scandal. They completely failed to realize that they were simply handing me the exact heavy shovels they would soon use to dig their own inescapable graves. Every tearful video Tiara posted to her millions of followers, every dramatic prayer request Yolanda made to her elite social circles, and every blatant, easily disprovable lie Malik spewed on that podcast was being meticulously recorded, transcribed, and legally notarized by Evelyn and my elite corporate legal team. My attorneys were quietly constructing a massive, undeniable public record of severe defamation, targeted harassment, and outright perjury. I watched the ridiculous media circus unfold from the absolute safety of my untouchable, heavily guarded fortress. Jay slept peacefully in his high-tech incubator, completely insulated from the chaotic, desperate world his biological family was frantically creating below us. Let them talk. Let them spin their elaborate, pathetic webs of deceit and slander. I wanted them to feel incredibly confident. I wanted them to fully believe their cruel manipulation was actually working, that they had successfully backed the quiet, ugly duckling sister into an impossible corner. Because the higher they blindly climbed on their fragile pedestal of lies, the more devastating and spectacular their inevitable fall would be. They were loudly and publicly setting the grand stage for their own total execution, and I was more than happy to sit back, sip my tea, and let them keep talking until the steel trap snapped entirely shut. Evelyn had already prepared our devastating counterattack, meticulously categorizing every single lie they had broadcast across the internet. We had the irrefutable bank statements, the hidden camera footage, the medical records, and the dashcam audio from the night of my agonizing labor. My family was operating purely on desperate emotion and malicious intent, while I was operating with cold, hard facts and unlimited financial resources. The upcoming family court hearing was not going to be a simple legal dispute over custody or marital assets. It was going to be an absolute, unmitigated slaughter. I placed my empty teacup onto the glass table, a serene smile touching my lips as I watched the city lights flicker. They wanted a public spectacle, and I was going to give them one. The morning of the hearing arrived with a thick, suffocating humidity that blanketed downtown Atlanta. My private security detail navigated my armored SUV through a massive sea of local news vans and gossip bloggers camped outside the Fulton County Family Court building. Malik and Yolanda had done their job well, whipping the media into a desperate frenzy. Flashes from cameras bounced off the tinted glass as my guards formed a tight, impenetrable wall around me and Evelyn. I wore a tailored charcoal gray suit, my hair pulled back into a severe, uncompromising bun. I carried no baby, no bags, and absolutely no visible emotion. We bypassed the screaming reporters and walked straight through the heavy double doors of the courthouse. The grand courtroom was packed to absolute capacity. Every wooden bench was filled with my mother's society friends, nosy church committee members and local journalists, eager for a high-profile spectacle. I took my seat at the defense table, folding my hands neatly in front of me. Across the aisle, my family sat shoulder to shoulder. Malik wore a perfectly fitted navy suit, looking every bit the tragic, alienated father he claimed to be. Yolanda and Desmond flanked him, projecting a sickening aura of unified, pious grief. Tiara sat directly behind them, hiding behind oversized designer sunglasses. When the bailiff announced Judge Clarissa Montgomery, the entire room rose. Judge Montgomery was a formidable, no-nonsense woman with a reputation for ripping apart frivolous lawsuits and destroying manipulative litigants. She took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and ordered Malik's attorney to present his opening arguments. Malik had hired a notoriously aggressive lawyer named Richard Vance, a man famous for staging theatrical courtroom performances. He paced in front of the judge's bench, speaking with exaggerated, booming urgency. He painted a horrifying, completely fabricated picture of my character. He claimed I was a deeply unstable, vindictive woman suffering from severe untreated postpartum psychosis. He dramatically described how I had allegedly locked my loving husband out of his own home, maliciously drained his life savings, and kidnapped a medically fragile infant to hold him hostage in a fortified tower. He waved a stack of papers in the air, demanding the immediate transfer of 50% of my assets and total physical custody of my son to protect the child from my supposed mental collapse. The audience murmured in rehearsed sympathy. Then Richard Vance called Yolanda to the witness stand. My mother walked up to the wooden box with the slow, trembling steps of a martyr. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and immediately launched into the greatest acting performance of her entire life. Tears streamed down her meticulously powdered cheeks. She clutched a lace handkerchief to her chest, her voice cracking with fake agony. "My poor, sweet daughter is sick," Yolanda wailed, looking pleadingly at the judge. "Sienna has completely lost her grip on reality. We just want to help her. We want to bring our precious grandson home where he belongs, surrounded by a family who loves him." She is holding that innocent baby captive because she is paranoid and delusional. Please, Your Honor, do not let her mental illness destroy our family. Give Malik his son. Let us save my daughter before it is too late. The gallery erupted into soft, supportive whispers. Yolanda dabbed her eyes, looking incredibly pleased with her devastating portrayal of a heartbroken matriarch. Malik bowed his head, pretending to wipe away his own tears. They had built a perfect, impenetrable wall of lies, completely confident that their social standing would shield them from any actual scrutiny. Judge Montgomery turned her stern gaze toward my table. She asked if my counsel had a cross-examination for the witness. Evelyn stood up slowly. She did not pace. She did not raise her voice. She simply buttoned her suit jacket, radiating the cold, lethal energy of an apex predator. Yes, Your Honor. Evelyn stated, her voice slicing through the thick courtroom air like a surgical scalpel. We have no questions for this witness. However, we do have digital evidence to submit directly to the court that will provide complete and absolute clarity regarding the plaintiff's claims of a loving, supportive family environment. Richard Vance immediately objected, claiming surprise evidence, but Evelyn had already filed the proper motions under seal the night before. Judge Montgomery overruled the objection and gestured toward the large multimedia screens mounted on the courtroom walls. Evelyn pressed a single button on her laptop. The screens flared to life, displaying the high-definition video feed from my SUV's internal dashcam. The timestamp in the corner clearly marked the exact date and time of Tiara's anniversary party. The courtroom was suddenly filled with the agonizing, blood-curdling sound of my own screams. The audio captured the raw, visceral terror of my complicated labor. The camera angle showed me dragging my bleeding, battered body across the marble floor of the foyer, collapsing heavily against the console table. The entire gallery gasped collectively as they saw the massive puddle of blood and amniotic fluid forming around my feet. Then the audio picked up Yolanda's voice. It was not the sweet, weeping voice of the concerned mother who had just testified. It was the harsh, venomous, utterly disgusted tone of a woman inconvenienced by her dying daughter. Call a cab. Sienna. Yolanda's voice echoed through the massive courtroom speakers, bouncing off the wood-paneled walls. We have the mayor's wife here, and I am not having sirens ruining your sister's anniversary. You are always so dramatic. Just walk out the back service door so you do not track any more of your mess through the main foyer and order a taxi for yourself. The video clearly showed Yolanda reaching into her designer purse, pulling out a crumpled $50 bill, and literally throwing it directly into the puddle of my blood. It showed Desmond actively turning his head away to sip his bourbon. It showed Malik standing completely still, watching me suffer, making absolutely zero effort to provide medical assistance or call for an ambulance. The video ended as I grabbed my keys and stumbled out the door alone. Absolute horrifying silence slammed down on the courtroom. The society women in the gallery sat frozen in sheer, unadulterated shock. Richard Vance dropped his legal pad, his mouth hanging open as he stared at the screen. Yolanda gripped the edges of the witness stand, her face draining of all color, her fake tears drying up instantly. The judge was visibly disgusted. Judge Montgomery leaned forward, her eyes narrowing into dangerous, angry slits as she glared directly at my mother. Is that your idea of wanting to save your daughter? The judge demanded, her voice dripping with profound contempt. Throwing garbage money at a hemorrhaging woman and telling her not to ruin a party. Before Yolanda could even attempt to stammer out a pathetic excuse, Evelyn stepped forward again. Your Honor, the defense is not finished, Evelyn announced, completely merciless. The plaintiff claims he is a devoted husband fighting a delusional wife for the safety of his child. We submit Defense Exhibit B, which explicitly details the plaintiff's true motivation for this frivolous lawsuit. Evelyn pressed another button. The screen switched from the driveway dashcam to the crisp, hidden camera footage from the master guest suite closet. The crystal-clear image of Malik forcefully pinning Tiara against the custom shelving lit up the room. The gallery erupted into shocked shouts and loud, scandalized murmurs. DeAndre, who had foolishly shown up to support the family narrative, shot up from his seat in the gallery, screaming profanities at his wife. The bailiffs immediately moved in to restore order, but the damage was already done. The audio played loudly, broadcasting Malik and Tiara's entire sinister conspiracy to the judge, the media, and every single member of the Atlanta elite in attendance. Just give me one more week with your miserable sister. Malik's voice boomed through the speakers. I finally got her to sign the proxy forms last night. The minute I wire that $2 million from her private equity fund into DeAndre's shell account, we are taking that trip to Dubai. Tiara's greedy, malicious laughter followed, completely destroying any remaining shred of her influencer reputation. Malik scrambled backward in his chair, pure panic radiating from his eyes. He grabbed Richard Vance's arm, begging his lawyer to do something, but Vance physically stepped away from him, realizing his client had just dragged him into a massive federal criminal conspiracy. Evelyn turned off the screen, turning her lethal gaze toward the judge's bench. Your Honor. My client is the sole proprietor of a private equity firm managing tens of millions of dollars. The plaintiff, Malik, orchestrated a premeditated, coordinated scheme to commit wire fraud against her estate while she was undergoing emergency surgery. We have already submitted the digital timestamps of his failed transaction attempt to the federal authorities. Judge Montgomery did not hesitate. She picked up her heavy wooden gavel and slammed it down with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. This court has heard absolutely enough, she declared, her voice radiating absolute furious authority. The plaintiff's entire case is dismissed with prejudice. I am finalizing the emergency protective order permanently. Malik, you have absolutely zero legal, physical, or financial rights regarding Sienna Johnson or her child. Furthermore, based on the clear, undeniable evidence of premeditated financial theft presented in this courtroom today, I am issuing a direct bench warrant. The heavy courtroom doors swung open at the exact back of the room. Two armed federal agents from the Financial Crimes Division marched straight down the center aisle. Malik tried to stand, his legs shaking violently, looking frantically for an exit that did not exist. Desmond and Yolanda shrank away from him, desperately trying to distance themselves from the catastrophic fallout. The agents grabbed Malik roughly by the arms, spinning him around and slamming metal handcuffs forcefully onto his wrists. He was crying real tears now, sobbing hysterically as they read him his rights and dragged him aggressively out of the courtroom. Tiara hid her face behind her hands, weeping loudly as the society women around her began whispering viciously, their judgmental gazes stripping away every ounce of her remaining social status. I sat perfectly still at the defense table, watching the entire magnificent execution unfold. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply gathered my belongings, standing up to leave as the judge formally closed the proceedings. I had walked into this courtroom as the target of a massive, coordinated smear campaign. I was walking out as the undisputed, untouchable victor, leaving my family to drown in the toxic, burning wreckage of their own making. As I walked down the center aisle, the crowd parted for me in stunned, terrified silence. I paused just for a fraction of a second beside the plaintiff's table, where my mother remained frozen in the witness box. Yolanda looked utterly broken, her eyes wide with the horrifying realization that her pristine social empire was completely, irreversibly destroyed. Desmond stared at the floor, sweating profusely, knowing his financial ruin was the very next chapter. They had tried to bury me alive, underestimating my strength and my massive resources. I adjusted the lapels of my tailored charcoal gray suit and continued my steady, powerful stride right out of the heavy oak doors. I stepped back into the suffocating humidity of the Atlanta morning, breathing in the sweet, intoxicating air of absolute victory and truly unshakable freedom. The aftermath of the courtroom execution was swift and exceptionally brutal. The digital evidence Evelyn submitted did not stay sealed. Within 48 hours, the hidden closet recording and the horrifying dashcam video were leaked to every gossip blog, news outlet, and social media platform in Atlanta. The public response was an avalanche of unadulterated disgust. My family had built their identity on high society optics, and I completely obliterated it. Yolanda was unceremoniously stripped of her prestigious Jack and Jill Society memberships. The wealthy church committees and charity boards she manipulated immediately revoked her status, erasing her name from their registries. She was permanently exiled from the Atlanta Black elite, transforming overnight from a revered matriarch into a social pariah. Women who had kissed her cheek at galas now crossed the street to avoid making eye contact. Desmond faced a harsh, tangible reality. True to my word, I executed the hard default on his mortgages. The bank seized his sprawling Buckhead mansion on a rainy Friday. He and Yolanda were forcefully evicted by the county sheriff, hauling whatever designer luggage they could carry to the curb. They begged my corporate office for an extension, but I denied it instantly. I did not just sell the property, I brought in a demolition crew. Through Obsidian Holdings, I personally stood on the sidewalk and watched heavy machinery bulldoze their fake empire straight into the dirt. I cleared the lot and donated the land to a nonprofit to build affordable housing for single mothers of color. It was the perfect eradication of everything my father ever valued. Tierra fared no better. The public humiliation of the leaked video utterly destroyed her influencer career. Brands dropped her overnight, canceling sponsorships and demanding products back. DeAndre, furious over the affair and his own simultaneous bankruptcy, filed for a vicious divorce. He abandoned her completely legally, shielding whatever hidden cash he had left, leaving Tierra with mountains of debt and a ruined reputation. She was forced to move into a tiny, rundown apartment, working a minimum wage retail job to survive. Malik received the ultimate consequence. Federal prosecutors offered no plea deal. He was convicted of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and sentenced to 10 years in a federal penitentiary, stripped of his arrogant swagger and tailored suits. 6 months after the trial, I walked out of the towering glass lobby of my corporate headquarters. I was flanked by my loyal security detail, reviewing a new commercial acquisition portfolio on my tablet. The crisp autumn air was refreshing. As I stepped onto the private executive walkway, two desperate, haggard figures lunged from the shadows of the adjacent public sidewalk. It was Yolanda and Desmond. The transformation was startling. My mother wore a faded, out-of-season coat, her once perfect hair unkempt and brittle. My father looked hollowed out, his shoulders hunched, his eyes frantic. They had bypassed the outer perimeter just to ambush me. "Sienna, please wait!" Yolanda cried out, her voice raspy and broken. She actually dropped to her knees right there on the cold concrete pavement, clasping her hands together in a pathetic, desperate prayer. "We have absolutely nothing left. The shelter is dangerous. We cannot survive like this. Please, you have so much money. We are your parents. You cannot just leave us out here to die in the streets. We are so sorry for everything. Just give us another chance." Desmond fell to his knees beside her, reaching his trembling hands out toward the hem of my designer coat. "Sienna, my brilliant girl," Desmond begged, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I was wrong. I was so arrogant and stupid. Please, just a small loan to get us a tiny apartment. We will do anything you want. We are begging you. Have mercy on your own blood." I stopped walking. I looked down at the two miserable people kneeling in the dirt at my feet. I felt absolutely no pity, no anger, and no lingering sorrow. The emotional tether had been completely severed. I looked my mother directly in her tear-filled eyes. "Call a cab." I whispered, my voice carrying the absolute chilling finality of a judge delivering a death sentence. I stepped around them without breaking my stride. I climbed into the back of my waiting armored SUV, the heavy door slamming shut on their desperate wailing pleas. I left them kneeling in the dust of their own spectacular ruin. 1 year later, the harsh memories of my toxic family feel like a distant, irrelevant nightmare. I sit on the sun-drenched terrace of my private gated estate, sipping a warm cup of herbal tea. The sprawling, lush gardens stretch out before me, a vibrant oasis of peace and absolute security. A few yards away, my beautiful, healthy toddler Jace giggles loudly as he chases a yellow butterfly across the bright, freshly manicured green lawn. The sound of his pure, innocent joy fills the air, healing every scar in my heart completely. Marcus and the security team maintain a silent, vigilant watch at the perimeter. Evelyn sits across from me at the patio table, reviewing our latest highly successful philanthropic initiatives. My business is thriving, my wealth is secure, and my mind is entirely at peace. I look at my son, his dark, beautiful skin glowing in the afternoon sun, and I realize the most profound truth of my entire existence. Blood does not make a family. Blood is just biology. True family is built on unwavering loyalty, mutual respect, and unconditional protection. I had to completely destroy the family I was born into, so I could safely build the family I actually deserved. I survived the fire and I emerged as the undeniable architect of my own magnificent destiny. Have you ever had to walk away from the people who were supposed to love you the most? Drop your story in the comments and do not forget to subscribe. Remember, sometimes the trash takes itself out.